please make sure you go over to YouTube, subscribe, or you can always find us on any of the podcast platforms, and that's Fostering Change.
Well, it's hard to believe we are actually in the month of May. That's exactly right. It is National Foster Care Awareness Month. I say this quite often. I actually think about foster care every single day. And I will take the month of May if that's what people want to give us. But I think as a society, the 700 children that arrive in our system as an average on a daily basis should be talked about. We should be thinking about how we can improve the system that is already laid within front of us. And by the way, the statistics show us that the system that we have has not been working. My next guest knows it firsthand. I was so excited when actually our same publisher, Simon & Schuster, reached out and they had published his book called Trouble. Now, you all know that I get a lot of books and I, talk to a lot of amazing authors. But I have to tell you, this one actually did a number on me. I was actually on vacation and I was able to finally start a book, end a book, and not have to pick up another book and read 3 books at one time. But let me tell you what caught me about this book is that it's very hard to find people that have grown up in foster care, have been touched by foster care, that have the same outlook that I do when it comes to what can we change instead of saying the status quo is okay. And as I read Rob's book, I kept thinking about the way I think and about how him and I very much, we are so different, but we are very the same. So Rob, welcome to Fostering Change.
Hey, thanks, Rob. It's great to be here.
Rob, I have to tell you, as somebody, you go in the military at the age of 17, which thank you for your service. As somebody who was in the United States Navy, I want to thank you so much. But I see the pathway. Now, then all of a sudden, not only do you go into the Air Force, but you did something that only 3% of kids who have actually been in foster care do, which is you went and got a college degree. And not just a college degree, you actually went to Yale.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It was, that's probably the last place I would have guessed I would end up if you had asked me at age 17 or before, what my life was going to look like in the future. My prospects were not especially promising when I was in foster care, and then later when I was adopted into this working class town and seeing the kind of family fragmentation that I was seeing all around me. And yeah, I was a terrible student and barely graduated high school, 2.2 GPA, and the military was just my lifeline out of there. Red Bluff, the town that I grew up in. So I was born in Los Angeles, grew up in foster homes in LA, never knew my father. My mother was addicted to drugs. She was unable to care for me. So I got put in the system when I was 3, adopted out of the system just before my 8th birthday. And yeah, it was a series of 7 different foster homes. And then, there was adoption, followed by divorce, followed by sort of, different kinds of family reconfigurations. My adoptive father stopped speaking with me. And yeah, it was just a really, it was just a series of setbacks and hurdles and emotional difficulties for a kid, which, as you're well aware. And then, by the time I was 17, I thought to myself, like, this is just, I don't know actually if the military is the right path for me. It was not a very well thought through decision, but I knew that the path that I was on at that time was the wrong one. This kind of, as a teenager, it was just a lot of smoking weed and drinking away the weekend and ditching classes and getting into fights and vandalizing buildings and, all the kinds of things that young boys do when they're in chaotic family environments, when their, parents are neglectful or when there's no father around. I mean, this is a very sort of common outcome for teenage boys, the kind of behavior that we were getting into. And yeah, the military was kind of the first smart decision I'd ever made up to that point. And yeah, that was the first step on my way to finally getting an education and recognizing the kind of latent, curiosities and academic interests that had always existed within me, but that I could finally accept about myself. And that's something else that I focus on in the book is the kind of, when you put a kid in those kinds of environments, foster care, orphanages, just severe disorder and disrepair, even if you present kids with opportunities, you identify a kid who seems to have some potential, some promise, and you say, hey, here's an opportunity for you. Here's a path towards a better life. A lot of those kids won't latch on to those opportunities because after years of mistreatment, you just usually don't have much of a desire to improve your life. Somewhere in the preface of Troubled, I say that when adults let a kid down enough, eventually a kid learns to let himself down. And that was kind of where I was at by the time I was 17.
Yeah, I have to I love that quote, by the way, because it is so true. It is so true. And I have people come to me all the time and they say, well, he's 16 or she's 16 years old, and now all of a sudden we're giving this pathway of great success. And I'm like, but look what you've done since they were 6. It's been a continuing cycle of trouble where,
Yeah.
no stability whatsoever. A child who comes into and you and I both have the same philosophy. Foster care is not the answer.
Yeah.
Foster care is not the answer. I mean, once a child hits the foster care system, we have already failed. We have already
Yeah.
failed.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that all of this money that we keep investing, and by the way, the government just wrote a huge check to another nonprofit to how to clean up the system, and I'm like, that's not the answer. The answer is, how do we keep a family intact? How do
Yeah.
we truly get into that family and figure out what is the disruption that is causing that family to have that? And we need to start noticing those kids' reactions because, like you said, and by the way, I'm a dad of 5 kids, 4
Hmm.
boys, all from the system. All of my children, they came from that troubled past. They have that detachment disorder, some of them, because, what they've gone through. What else do we expect?
Yeah.
If you had, I always ask this to some of my favorite friends. I always say, if you had one opportunity to make one change within our system, what would be the first change that you would make, knowing that you had been in it?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I 100% agree that in an ideal world we wouldn't like foster care wouldn't exist because kids would be born into loving families with adults who would prioritize their care and their needs, and there would be no need for state interference for some person to get involved with the family and take the child away. But given that we live in the real world, I mean. It would be nice. So one of the reasons why, and I think this happens to a lot of kids actually. So my case was interesting because, so again, like I never knew my father. No one knew where he was. After I was taken from my mother was questioned by police officers, forensic psychologists, and so forth. And they asked her, "Where's this boy's father?" Because you're clearly not in a position to care for him. And she said she didn't know. And so, my mother was an immigrant from Seoul, from South Korea. And I was born in Los Angeles. I was an American citizen, so I was placed in the LA County foster care system. She was deported. That was not her first run-in with law enforcement. She'd had a series of interactions with the cops. And eventually I learned that my father, by the way, I took a genetic ancestry test and learned that my father was Mexican. So I'm half Hispanic, half Korean. Um, and so anyway, I should have been put up for adoption essentially right away because I had no family. But instead, I got caught in this, massive bureaucratic machine, the foster care system in LA, which is one of the sort of most overburdened, overstressed systems in the country. And no one really actually carefully read my file and recognized that no one from my family of origin was ever going to return to care for me. And it wasn't until by the time I arrived at my 7th foster home, I was it was part of a mandatory sort of mental health checkup. The state of California, it ordered me. I had to go see this psychiatrist just to sort of see how I was doing in the system. And you're well aware that these things sort of periodically occur. And this doctor basically actually carefully read my file, recognized what my situation was, and strongly recommended that I be put up for adoption. And I described that in the book as well. But the issue was that no one had actually carefully read my file up at that point. I went 5 years just sort of bouncing around homes before someone realized, like, oh, this kid is basically just going to stay in the foster care system forever. We might as well just put him up for adoption. And so my recommendation or my fix would be more resources, more time, more ability to basically allow social workers, caseworkers to tailor their approach to each individual kid, to just sit down and whatever it takes, every month, every quarter, whatever it is, just sit down, whoever's you're responsible to, whoever you're assigned to, or hire someone else to do this job, and just carefully read what's going on with this kid. What's, given his circumstances or her circumstances, what should we do? Put them up for adoption, put them up in foster care, check on the family of origin, try to minimize instability and minimize the number of placements.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. And I'm a true believer that children should not sit on the sidelines waiting for adults to play the game because,
Yeah.
we all fall, by the way, Rob. I mean, take it from you and me growing up in the system, aging out, we've all fallen in our lives. But there's a big difference between someone who falls and someone who continues to stay down. And I feel that, children should not be the pawn of that. And so for our kids, they came into the system and they were doing what you did. They were floundering. And it was finally after 2 years of nothing moving and nobody doing anything and no one visiting them and no one opening up a gate of permanency for them is when my husband and I said, no more. We're going to roll the dice. We're going to hire an attorney and we're going to file for adoption because in our country, if a child lives in your home with it for 6 months, you legally can file for adoption, whether the state wants that or not. And so we decided to take that chance. And let me tell you something, Rob. It was a fight because we had social workers who did not agree with this. And they were like, no, 2 years isn't. And I was like, we're the third placement. 2 years, not one birth parent has showed up for a visitation. 2 years, nobody's knocking on the door, no auntie or uncle or Grammy or no one. And so I'm not going to allow these kids to go through the mental abuse that I went through as a young boy, because I should have been adopted, and never had that opportunity. And I hear you say that same story. The fact is that we do see too many kids just floundering. And by the way, you were a lot more, how do I say, marketable in our system at 3 than you were at 8.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was like in hindsight, I talked to my adoptive mom about this. I talked, yeah, and I say like, I mean, that was a risk, taking this 8-year-old boy out of foster care, 7 different homes, from this kind of this chaotic background, bouncing around the LA foster care system. And, to her credit, I think they did put up with a lot. I was, I documented in the book, I was a little bit of a troublemaker, a little bit of a back talker. It was a lot to handle. And you're right. What the younger a kid is, the easier it is to find a placement for them. And I think this is something else that we're all kind of aware of. Like this, I mean, it's kind of sad because a lot of this information isn't necessarily news to people who are familiar with the system. It's just a sort of a matter of attention, resources, execution, and so on. A lot of it is just kind of this bureaucratic inertia. I don't know what it is, but we just don't have enough people focusing on how to optimize the care for these kids. And the sad thing is that children themselves, and this isn't really something I thought about until after I'd read the book. Sometimes people will say, what did you discover anything new in the process of reading this book? And I guess one discovery, and as I say it a lot, it may sound obvious, is that like one reason why the system is so screwed up, why we don't devote more attention to it, is because children themselves have no power. They have no political power. Like physically, they're smaller, they're vulnerable. They can't unite and agitate on behalf of their own interests the way that other historically mistreated groups have done. For many reasons. They're small, they're unsophisticated, immature, they lack the education, all these kinds of things. There's a variety of reasons. But essentially, that's the reason why. Like, it's horrible to say, but if you have this kind of disenfranchised, marginalized, vulnerable group, and they have no ability to say, hey, like, we are being mistreated and harmed and so forth, then like naturally, the broader society, the power holders, the stakeholders, the influencers in society are just not going to devote the kind of attention that they deserve,
I agree. And, for me, I think it's an industry that makes money on the backs of children.
Mm,
And that's all that they're doing is making money because, you ride in on that white horse to save the child, but then all of a sudden that kid becomes 16, 17, and then they become a delinquent. And then the next thing you know, we're filling our penitentiaries with kids who are from the foster care system. We're wondering why are they so troubled? Then we get these myths about these bad kids. My husband and I, we rolled the dice and we decided to adopt our fifth child. And we brought in a child who was 18 years old, been in the
mm,
system, shattered life. But I looked in that boy's eyes. I'll never forget it, Rob. And I saw hope. And I
mm.
saw somebody who just wanted someone to love him, and he's now 23 years old, finished his sophomore year in college. He's,
Oh, great.
getting ready to, he wants to be a police officer and go to the academy. And all he needed was one caring adult to
Mm,
believe in him. And does he
mm.
have trouble? Hell yes. We all come with trauma. But you know what? The fact is that if one child gets one person to truly love them unconditionally, I think that they could do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. That love piece is the missing component. I think all those things are great, right? Like going to college is a good thing, getting gainful employment, having a nice sort of resume or CV, going on that sort of track towards being a self-sufficient and productive member of society. But there are these sort of immeasurable, intangible qualities like love, like care, like
Mm.
emotional security, and those things are hard to measure, right? Like you can measure how many foster kids go off to college. That's a very easily captured statistic. But measuring how many kids feel safe at home or how many kids feel loved or their day-to-day sort of experiences of stability and security and attachment and all those kinds of things, those are not captured in statistics. And we just focus less on those questions. And a good deal of my book, I focus on this of as someone who has achieved education and done pretty well for myself in my life. There was a point where I came to this realization of despite all of these accomplishments that I'm very thankful to have achieved, experienced, all those things. I'm grateful for all of it. But when I was writing the book and when I was sort of remembering and reflecting on all of the difficulties of the first 17 plus years, and even in the military there were some setbacks and issues with alcohol, and I had to go to rehab and all these things. Like I would have ultimately, given the choice, traded all of these adult successes to have just had, a sort of a more normal, stable childhood, to have like sort of one attachment figure
Right.
that would have endured throughout my childhood instead of being moved through a series of different homes. It was really hard. And one way I'm dealing with it is to just sort of speak aloud, communicate about it, and in a way, it helps to give meaning
No, I
to my
agree. I mean, let me tell
experience,
you,
and maybe
when
you
I
have
wrote,
the same. Yeah.
I agree. When I wrote my memoir, it was so therapeutic because I hadn't spoke about it for so long because I
Mm,
was so worried about the stigma of someone putting the F word in front of my name because, I was a successful businessman and no one knew the story of the fact that I was the 18-year-old that was eating out of the trash can on the street that you pass by, and that I was showering in the gym at school because I was homeless, but I didn't want anybody to know about that. So when I wrote my book, that was one of the things that, I remember my writer and I, it was hours and hours and hours, thousands of hours of tape. But I remember going to my therapist saying, this has been the best,
mm.
just I felt like this big weight off my shoulders. And, did that feel like that when you put that period at that last chapter?
Yeah, it did feel, it was just an emotional roller coaster writing all of it and going through all of it and the memories and, speaking with my adoptive sister, some of the friends that I grew up with, just trying to spark all of the old memories, resurface all of these past experiences. And then, yeah, finally getting to the end. And yeah, it felt like a weight lifted off. It's finally down on paper, the way that I wanted it to be told. It was, it was the story as I wanted it. And yeah, I was proud of it. And also felt a bit of that fear, a little bit of that apprehension of like, wow, people are going to know basically like every single failure, mistake, setback, all of the kind of, the self-loathing and the feelings of powerlessness and vulnerability. And those were the hardest chapters, funny enough, were the sort of first maybe 2 or 3 chapters of being a little kid, subject to the whims of adults, of like really feeling just, completely powerless, of not having any agency or ability to do anything. And, I was surprised at how fresh some of those memories were.
So one of the things I have to tell you, so when my book came out, I reached out to, bio family and even foster family, and I was surprised the amount of people that shut the door on me after I wrote my story because they didn't want that story to be told. They didn't want to know the downfalls that they had done. Did you
Mm.
get any of that backlash whatsoever?
Not really. I mean, I sent some early chapters around to some of the friends that I write about, and I changed the names and stuff. So, they read a little bit of it, and I mean, my high school friends just thought it was kind of funny, like retelling all of these, like, the misadventures. My sister, there was a little bit of that. It was not so much, she wasn't upset with how she was portrayed, but she was just like, I guess she was not expecting the level of emotion that I communicate in the book, and how, I guess just how heavy it was. My mom, kind of the same. She was kind of like, yeah, yeah, but I tried to be as fair as I could, and ultimately, didn't really have that much, in the way of pushback or challenging me on anything. And part of that was just because I asked them, I'm like, hey, there's this story. Do you remember it? Am I being
Right,
fair? Am I
right.
being as accurate as you can remember it? So, yeah, that was nice. But because I have heard stories of other memoirists, having a bit of conflict and some battles with family members and people that they write about.
Yeah, and like you, I changed everybody's name, but listen, everybody, the book is called Trouble. Okay, it's Rob Henderson. I'm telling you, Rob, what a great conversation. The one reason that I do this podcast is to do exactly what you and I did, was just to have a conversation.
Hmm.
Everybody, listen, I know I've said it often, there are books that truly can move you, books that can make you, do that second glance, which is something I think that we need to do when it comes to child welfare. But this memoir called Troubled, as I say, if I love the book, where does it go? It goes right here on my shelf that I can pass it to other people as they come in. Rob, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for doing what I think so many people need to do that have experience like you and I have. Because what I love about your story is that you did not fit the mold, and you did not allow a mold to fit you. And I'm just so proud that, I got to interview. So thank you so much. Everyone, we'll have the link on our website. We'll also have the link on this. And by the way, National Foster Care Awareness Month. Do me a favor, pop me an email. Let me know what you're going to do to help us change this system. And by the way, that can easily be sign up to be a CASA. Especially we are in so need of CASAs. When you talk about California alone, LA County with over 26,000 kids in our foster care system, they need a mentor. And having one person, one adult who truly loves and believes in you can be the difference of whether or not you're sitting at Yale, or you're sitting behind a prison bar. So everybody, this is another great edition of Fostering Change. Until next time, continue to lead by example. Take care.
Hey everybody, it's Rob Scheer, the founder of Comfort Cases, and thanks for tuning in to Fostering Change. You can actually watch a couple of episodes right here